Hello, Johnny Gabar. Here I am again. Call me Johnny. Remember, no Mr., no Sir stuff. Adjusting my chair there. Isn't that kind of fun? I got a chair that does that. Hey, welcome to part two, trauma and addiction. Very excited. Got some great stuff for you. Make sure you have your manual because some of the stuff you want to write, I already have written down for you in the manual. And then have the test, the addictive, diseased, and trauma test in front of you. I'm on page 2, and I'll be asking you to record some stuff as we do that. Okay. Just to remind you, this is kind of the heavy stuff. We're going to go into the stuff that, for me as a person in long-term recovery, I found life-changing. Yes. And it's allowed me to enter a much more comfortable, stable, and peaceful recovery. I'm very happy to report that to you. There is help for the likes of us. Who's us? It's people with high trauma scores, people who would describe themselves as being pretty anxious, phobic, nervous kind of people. And we'll be delving deeply, deeply into that. So this is especially a time that you'll want someone lined up that you can have the opportunity to process some of this material with. Okay. We're going to tell you something else now. A lot of this for me is going to involve storytelling. I think storytelling can be very helpful. You're going to see that I'm going to weave in a lot of autobiographical kind of stuff here. And one of the reasons I do that, well, probably unmet narcissist needs. That's pretty possible. But another is that I like to demonstrate, I like to model that a person like me can get over that stuff. If I can, maybe others too. And I like that kind of peer mental model, believe it or not. That's kind of important to me, of not being afraid to say, I'm human, here's my stuff. And maybe that will open some doors that some folks, it'll be easier for them to look at this stuff at kind of a personal level. Personal? Personal level? Indeed. So this is material we could couch in professional development terms, but for most people, you got to take it on a personal level. Why? Because most people in the addiction counseling world tend to have elevated ACE scores. You'll find out about that in a moment. And that means a higher than normal trauma load. As we take on these issues, address these issues, learn stuff about these issues, heal from these issues, we'll be more able to help the people we serve who have the same issues. Conversely, if we don't deal with this stuff, that's contagious too, and we will be diminishing the work that we can do to be helpful to other folks. Just telling you like it is, okay? So, here we go. I am going to open up today's PowerPoint. And I am so hoping that you're seeing in front of you part 2, trauma and addiction. With part 2, trauma and addiction, there's 19 slides we're going to look at. The first slide is, I just want to tell you for a moment where I come from. So you know, I certainly have some blind spots in this area. I certainly have my own stuff. And while I've worked really hard to address this material, I want you to know that clearly an imperfect being, but also to really make it personal in the depth of this stuff for myself and then my eventual overcoming most of it. So you're going to be looking at a 10-point ACE score. That stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey. You'll be taking that in a minute. A high score is actually a 2 or a 3. Real high score is a 4. And I know many of you are going to have much higher than that. My personal score was 5. One of the things that it turns out, there can be very brief windows of problems when you're very young, and that can imprint and cause difficulties with your brain development, your neurodevelopment, depending upon when those times occur. So I was hospitalized for 6 weeks at the age of 3. Maybe that's not a big deal. I think it was. In my studies of all this, I came upon a story of Ted Zenglinski's, I think I got his name right, the Unabomber, his mother saying when he was very young, he went to the hospital, he got sick, and he went to the hospital just for 1 week. And she said, the Ted that left home is not the Teddy that returned. Interesting. I grew up with an alcoholic father. Interesting in that his alcoholism was pretty invisible. And it was many years before I understood the implications of this. So his behavior was at home, his irritability, all the other stuff was at home. We just didn't see him drink until I was much, much older. Um, on both sides of my family, there was all kinds of dysfunction, lots of alcoholics, lots of weirdness among my parents' siblings and my grandparents, and they did not contribute to any sense of that this world is safe. And I believe that's the family's number one job, is to communicate to small children that the world is safe. So my own hypervigilance and hyperarousal, which we talk about later, but the overactivation of my sympathetic nervous system resulted in me being a bedwetter until the age of 13. That was really traumatic. A chronic blusher. People used to say to me in school when they had nothing else to do, look at Johnny, look at him turn red. I wouldn't turn red, I'd turn purple. They found that very amusing. Not amusing. To this day, I don't enjoy when people try and scare me. And the reason is, I mean, it so activates my adrenaline system. It's quite uncomfortable. I don't like it. Not fun. Don't do that. Socially phobic and stutter. What? I talk for a living? Are you kidding me? Yeah. I throughout my life, and it was interesting. As long as I was around people I knew, it wasn't bad. So I pretty much was just around people I knew. But in new situations, it got so bad, and this was in my early recovery, I couldn't say my own name. So literally, someone would say, "Who are you?" And I would say, "Uh, uh," and nothing would come out. Now, I could talk, I just couldn't say the things that I wanted to say. And that's kind of common for a stutterer. I eventually got some treatment for that, and I learned that the worst thing I could do is avoid situations that created this anxiety that resulted in me not being able to talk. So very slowly, I applied that principle, avoidance. For those of you who have taken other classes with me, you know I'm quite big on avoiding avoidance. Embrace the anxiety, walk through it, and then that gives you a victory. On the other hand, if you give in to the anxiety, you've just reinforced it. And I think you can see people, their world will get smaller and smaller and smaller as they try to avoid things that create anxiety. Enough of that. I'm also a person with addictive disease. That's been no surprise. I've talked about that before. In my adult life, this really created problems for me. Add all this stuff up. I had a broken picker, people. A broken picker. Now, you know what a broken picker is, I hope. That's when you pick people to be in relationships with that aren't good for you. And upon further review, you look at them and you go, holy shit, how did I pick that? How'd that make sense to me? And before you get into recovery, you blame them. And then later, as you begin to recover from codependency and begin to move through that, you realize that while you're pointing at them and say, that was a sick puppy, oh my God, there's 3 pointing at me because I picked them. Um, Insecure attachment, we'll talk about that. Been an issue with me my whole life, still is. I just know how to deal with it these days. I'll be talking more about that later. And then finally, and I really want to claim this, that I have been fiercely codependent. I mean, and codependency, quick definition, is being other-centered to the point of self-harm. That will come up in module 3. But that no insight into the importance of self-care or taking care of my needs, but rather prioritizing everyone else around me and then wondering why I'm going down in flames. My God, I'm the teacher. Look at this list. Holy, oh my goodness. And what I have learned is that I'm pretty much over all this stuff. The only one that's still with me today that I have to put any really effort into is the insecure attachment, because I can kind of turn that into paranoia and create beliefs about my wife that just aren't true. And then I have some strategies on how to deal with that. Still do that to this day, but not nearly as I have in the past. So let's take a moment. This is actually called Misery Trail. It's at Smith Rock. And I had to widen it up because I wanted to show this picture. That's really steep. That's why the switchbacks in the road. I think it's really aptly named Misery Trail. It's a beautiful place. If you have good cardio, it's totally worth it. There's nothing technical about it. It's all about lungs. I did enjoy my walking sticks. I did see a big snake at one point on the trail. You actually get to see some people, when I went anyway, climbing some of the rocks, and that's just awesome to me. I would never do it, frankly, but awesome being able to do that. And then I think learning how to identify those things that didn't go so well for us as kids is important to find our voice, not so we can live there, but so we can tell those stories, identify the dynamics that got us to who we are today, and then hopefully learn some skills, practices, strategies to change those dynamics in our life. So we're going to start with the Adverse Childhood Experiences Questionnaire. I'm later, very soon, going to tell you about more of this. But for now, let's say this is a measure. It's a rough measure, but it's a measure of lack of safety that we experienced as children. This comes from the 1990s. Kaiser Permanente was doing a study on weight loss, and they found they were very successful helping people lose weight that could be 1, 2, 300 pounds. But then odd things kept happening. These people who had great success in losing weight actually then began to develop all kinds of weird behaviors and night eating and blackout eating and smoking and other stuff. And they're and begin to ask the question, what's going on? Eventually, one of the researchers, a Dr. Felitti, observed that one of his patients had come in and had talked about being sexually abused as a child. Well, in all of his practice up to this date, that had never happened, which I myself am kind of interested in that. How is that? Because it is so prevalent. But nevertheless, that it was his experience. And then a few weeks later, someone else came in and they had the same experience of telling him they'd been sexually abused as a child. So this stimulated some thinking of maybe weight is more than weight. Maybe having a lot of weight has to do with negative childhood events. Maybe losing weight is somehow losing a coping skill, an insulation, if you will, a protection against those negative childhood events. So Kaiser Permanente and the Center for Disease Control, and there's lots of stuff on the internet about this you can look up, partnered together, and they created this adverse childhood experiences study. And during the study, it involved over 17,000 people who appeared in various Kaiser's facilities down in San Diego. And in essence, they gave them this questionnaire, and then they did health histories, and they followed people over the next 10 years. The results of this study and this study are a big dog in the trauma world, in the trauma literature, in understanding trauma. and the effect that it can have over one's lifetime. When this research originally came out, it was kind of ridiculed. People wouldn't accept it. Today, it's a mainstream idea, and it has spawned so many other efforts and protocol developments and all kinds of things in understanding trauma and then as a result of that understanding, creating trauma informed workplaces. So this gets personal now. It involves this inventory of one's life. This questionnaire does appear in your manual. So if you need to stop this video for a minute to go look at that, I'm not going to read all the questions for you. They are there. I'm going to tell you about a couple. Number 7, I find interesting because it defines domestic violence as a woman getting hit. We know better today. Mothers and stepmothers, sure, getting hit, bad thing, that would count. But so would a father or stepfather getting hit. They've redone this research that originally was looked upon as a heterosexual issue, where heterosexual men were hitting heterosexual women. And today, of course, we know better that despite one's sexual orientation, intimates hit intimates, gay men hit gay men, lesbian women hit lesbian, straight women hit straight men, and straight men hate straight women. The point really not being one's gender or sexual orientation, but is there violence between intimates? So I'm just saying you might consider that as you answer number 7. The other thing to know about this is that I know it's a very rough measure, and each question comes up with a yes or a no answer. That's it. Not how many times it happened. Although you could see very quickly that the severity of these answers would change if it was 3 times that event happened or 300. But this test does not discern that. So each time you answer a yes, then that becomes 1 point. The total number of points you could get maximally is 10. So everyone will come up with a score between 0 and 10. You might consider stopping the video right now and doing your ACE score. If you would like double your trauma, when you do yours, you might consider doing your kids now too. Just saying, it's a thought. Okay, so I'm hoping all of you have completed the ACE questionnaire and you've returned to this video. Here's what they discovered. That of the 17,000 plus people who took it, 1 in 4 were exposed to 2 categories of ACEs. 1 in 16 were exposed to 4 categories. That's about 6.5%. I have been giving people an opportunity to do this questionnaire for many, many years now. And I've done it mainly for people who are doing the training to become a certified recovery mentor. That's a training I also do. But I've also done it for people who are on the CADC 1 track, just generally professional, people who are interested in developing professionally to serve the addiction population. And over that time, and I've done this dozens of times by now, I found that the lowest score for that group was 60% of people reported having an ACE score of 4 or higher. And then that goes up to 90% of people having an ACE score of 4 or higher. So what I found is that folks who want to be in the addiction counseling world, not only are they going to work with people, that's their clients, who have high ACE scores, but the community of people providing services have a high ACE score. And that's amazing when you think about it. The difference between 6.5% and 60 to 90% is massive and has huge implications regarding the workforce itself. And overall, what's that going to mean? We're not going to live as long. We're going to tend to have hypervigilance and hyperarousal. We're going to tend to be more prone to vicarious traumatization. We talk about that much later in this course. We're going to really need connection and empathy to help us as burnout prevention. But unfortunately, the higher your ACE score, the more likely you're comfortable receiving empathy and connection. So it has all kinds of implications. What I'm going to do now is that I'm going to pause this particular PowerPoint, and I'm going to go to a different one. Now, the PowerPoint I'm going to go to, there's a number of them available on the internet, and this one is from the Anna Institute. I just like it. I've used it for a long time. And what this one does, it's going to give us correlations between your ACE score and different outcomes. Now, it's not causation. So I'm going to share with you some of the theories I have and some of the experiences I have. So those things may or may not ultimately turn out being accurate, but their correlations are clear. This is the correlations you see this is what they got from their study. I am going to pause just for a moment. All right, so now we're going to get up in front of us, this PowerPoint I was making reference to. And there should be in front of you the PowerPoint. And I'm not all that confident that it's up there. So I'm going to, well, okay. So it should be up there. I just need to make sure that it is, to make sure. And this PowerPoint, I believe I put it in your manual. If not, ask me for it. It is available via SlideShare. So you can get this for yourself if that's what you're interested in. So, okay. So we're going to try this a little bit different, and we're going to get this up in front, and that should be right there in front of you now. That's my hope. Okay. So this is the Anna Institute. They start with a good quote. There's no trust more sacred than the one the world holds with children. There is no duty more important than ensuring that their rights are respected, that their welfare is protected, that their lives are free from fear and want, and that they grow up in peace. So that's a nice philosophy. I like it. And it's the basics of healthy brain development. So if you want a child to develop its brain as healthy as it can, its environment is everything. And a nurturing, safe environment is really important. So this presentation, the slides were created by the CDC. This presentation was created by Ann Jennings, PhD at the Anna Institute. Okay. So I am not going to spend time with a lot of her introductory stuff. And you can certainly go back to that if you like. So this is the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, decade long. It's actually over 17,000 people involved, looked at the effects of adverse childhood experiences over the lifespan, and it's a big dog, largest study ever done on this subject. Punchline, childhood experiences are powerful determinants of who we become as adults. It really matters. That's a long list. We're going to go into it in a little bit greater detail in some of them. And I doubt if you can read all that list. But if you really want it, you could go to that slide share that I mentioned and look at it in detail. So here was our categories of 1 in 4 exposed to 2 categories of ACEs, 1 in 16 to 4, a lot of sexual abuse. All right. Here's a list no one really wants to be on. The higher the ACE score, yep, that's us. Us, me, in a third person sense, the greater the likelihood of severe and persistent emotional problems, Yay. Health risk behaviors, serious social problems, adult disease and disability, high health and mental health care costs, and poor life expectancy. Let's look at this. So on the bottom, you're going to see that the ACE score goes from 0 to 4. And many of you, I know, you have an ACE score higher than 4. So I can't say for sure, I'm pretty sure that this probably goes up with your ACE score, probably doesn't go down. So if you look at it, depression rates for women are reported to be over 50%, and with men over 30% if you have a score of 4 or higher. Now, I'm suspicious about this one. One of the things I'm suspicious about is that, is it depression or is it exhaustion? One of the things that you get with a high ACE score eventually, well, we'll talk about it, but it's hypervigilance and hyperarousal. It takes a lot of energy to pay attention to everything. It takes a lot of toll on you, energy out of you, if you're always scanning your environment. So that's one comment I have. The other comment I have is that notice there appears to be a difference between women and men. I'm suspicious of those numbers because in our culture, men are not trained to talk about their feelings, or not encouraged to talk about their feelings. And then when you look at suicide rates, all of a sudden men are pretty good at killing themselves. They don't talk about it much, they don't identify it much, but suicide is a real problem. And there you go. The higher the ACE score, the more likely the person will commit suicide. Here's an interesting thing that those of you who are in 12-step communities will see: people who have long-term sobriety who kill themselves. I don't know this for a fact. This is what I'm suspicious of. That they read the books, they read the promises, they had the belief everything's going to be okay once they got clean and sober, and they did, and they were still miserable. And maybe it was because of unidentified and untreated childhood trauma. Just a thought. Okay, here comes a big ass personal disclosure you weren't thinking of. Now, I get what they're saying about hallucinations, and we typically, people would think about those kind of schizophrenic, that you'll see people who will lose contact with their actual physical surroundings, see things that aren't there, hear things that aren't there. Okay. My experience in talking about what I'm about to say with people, and my own experience, is that our hallucinations were mainly centered in the environment, but when you throw in attachment issues with this, that we can have paranoia and hallucinate that people are abandoning us, that people are saying negative things about us, that people are not where they think they're supposed to be. And then we go, there's bad reasons for that. Boy, this one has haunted me. I have really created disharmony in my life with my wives at different times until I learned how to deal with this, and freaking out when they didn't answer the phone, blowing them up with text, blowing them up with phone calls, creating crazy thoughts in my head that maybe they were dead, maybe they were victim of a crime, maybe they were having affairs, and all of that. And if you were to take a videotape of what's in my head, it was absolutely no facts supported these beliefs, but these videos are going in my head that would then result in my heart beating really quickly and me getting very, very uncomfortable. And of course, until I figured this out, once I did chat with my wife, then I would kind of try and make it her problem. Where are you? Where have you been? What's been going on? So as I'm freaking out and laying this on her, of course, that could cause some problems. And it very much felt like hallucinations to me. Upon further review, I was later to find out that my adrenal system is way overworking. I am easily triggered, and that's part of the hypervigilant, hyperarousal stuff. So with very little stimulus, my heart pumps, I get really excited, fight or flight kicks in, and then I'm trying to make sense of it. And that is, well, my wife's in danger or something like that. Now, here's the deal. I have presented this enough. I know I'm not alone. I know many of you who are watching this suffer with this. Now, because we're right there, I'm going to tell you how I figured out how to deal with this. One, quit blaming my partners. Two, quit blaming myself. Think about it as, well, this is just a weird little thing that happens to me. And when it does, I need to take responsibility for it. Try not to water those seeds. So to this day, for me, here's a coping strategy. Once I talk to my wife, I will say, honey, you know, that little weird thing that happens to me and I freak out, kind of doing that right now. I just need to ask you a couple questions. One, do you love me? She always says yes. Are you planning on leaving me? She'll always say no. And I calm right down. Conversely, if for some reason I can't get a hold of her, it's just going to go round and round and round in my head. And I have all kinds of self-regulation strategies you will learn in the final module of this course. Okay, those work. Those are good. Those are good to connect with other people. Yep, that's all good stuff. But until I actually get to chat with her, it's going to be very hard for me to deal with my level of activation. And I know I'm not alone. Childhood sexual abuse and the number of unexplained symptoms. So imagine these are folks who, again, my theory is that we're in the state of agitation, too much adrenaline, easily triggered, and we're trying to understand it. So we'll take this discomfort and add fear to it, and then we'll go to the doctor, and people say, I don't know, I can't find anything. And it's probably most of the time because we just have too much adrenaline, and doctors can't fix that. They can't fix that. So one of the things again is being able to breathe into it and know, okay, that's my proclivity. I'm going to tend to do that. I am 65 years old today, and I have found the older I get, the more likely something hurts. Okay. And most days I can close my eyes, and if I wanted to, I could find some disharmony in my body. It's just the way it is. And then you deal with it and you forget it and you get up and cope. Well, if you have this drive of adrenaline and, oh, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? That can create a lot of fear and other issues related to my physical self and fear regarding that. So, okay, this one's just interesting. A score and impaired memory of childhood. Be careful with this one. Simply because you can't remember some things from childhood doesn't mean something happened. However, if you were in a constant state of fear and not feeling safe, then it is harder to be able to recall some events because it all kinds of blends together. I don't have much else on that one. Oh my God. Higher the A score, the more likely that you're a smoker. You know that freebasing nicotine, I know that's smoking, right? Freebasing nicotine, more accurate description of it. Freebasing nicotine is really rampant in the recovering community, and it's something we're kind of in denial about. So being willing to tell the truth that it is a drug addiction we have loss of control over, and that we don't break out in bouts of intoxication. It's a more subtle loss of control. We keep doing something that we know is harmful to us. And our values of health and being good role models and all of that, that the need for another smoke just overrides those other values. So let's not kid ourselves. And let's not kid ourselves that if you as a helper, if you smoke, it's more likely that people you serve will smoke and your children will smoke. Oh, I know what you're saying. Vaping. It's not any better. If it's part of a quitting process you've decided on, cool. Cool. But simply replacing nicotine addiction via smoking with nicotine addiction via vaping, There's a lot of negative consequences to some of the aerosol of the oils involved and all of that. Don't kid yourself. Okay. You want to accurately describe it? These behaviors, you could characterize it this way. Looking for mama in all the wrong places. That's right, I said it. Smoking can be construed as a way of self-soothing and self-regulation to deal with our pain that we tend to have that comes up as a result of having an elevated ACE score. So instead of learning healthy ways of self-regulation, and instead of learning how to turn to people, we turn to things. And the last thing that we tend to, well, there's two last things we tend to hang on to when we get into recovery and then service others. One is smoking, the other is eating. I know the carb intake process for stress reduction. I know I struggle with that one. Fine. Look at the relationship between an elevated ACE score and the likelihood of alcoholism. Same thinking between that and nicotine. Between IV drug use. So it's a very different way to think about this, that the underlying factor of addiction is not drugs, but rather it's experience dependent. That the more likely, the more unsafe a person's childhood, which is indicated by an elevated ACE score, the more likely that they are looking for alcohol, drugs, including marijuana, including smoking, as ways of trying to feel better, of self-regulation. And there's a quote: basic cause of addiction is experience dependent, not substance dependent. So what does that mean? Well, eventually we need to take a look at, so the brain has already kind of gone wrong now because of this experience dependent. You can't redo the first couple of years of life. So it's already going to kind of break the brain, but it's then what do we do with that? Can we overcome it? And we can overcome part of it. And so, for example, we can learn to connect with people. We can learn healthy ways of self-regulation. But what this really tells us is that abstinence is not recovery. It's not enough. Abstinence can allow us to begin to make the changes that a stable, healthy, peaceful recovery can become based on. But it's a starting point, not an end point. Okay. And if you think about this, I think this makes some sense, that the more higher the ACE score, the more likely a person had an unsafe childhood environment. This is Johnny's theory. The more likely later in life they would be putting themselves in unsafe environments without knowing it. Because hell, if you don't know what safety looks like as a kid, how are you going to know what it looks like as an adult? I am not blaming the victims here. Please don't hear me say that. I'm simply saying that a person is going to be less conditioned to see the indications of danger in their life in terms of this kind of social contact, because no one helped them see it when they were children. It was in their bones, like that's normal, having creepy people around. Just saying. There's going to be a whole bunch of slides about domestic violence. And basically, as ACE score goes up, people are more likely to perpetrate and be a victim of domestic violence. I want to get back and talk about domestic violence for a moment. And we got to be careful here because, again, I am not blaming the victim. However, as my dear friend Maria taught me, she worked in domestic violence for over 25 years. She said very frequently the majority of clients they had at their facility were repeat customers. So what does that mean? It means that the majority, in this case women, the majority of the women had been there before when they had been victimized by a particular perpetrator. They then get out, get their lives back together. They then couple with another perpetrator. So they often have a series of people Excuse me, that was a little sneeze. So their history is to couple with people who end up hitting them. And so this is what Maria said, until they learn that they have a broken picker, they're going to tend to be attracted because of unresolved childhood trauma and issues to couple with people who are abusers. I am not blaming them from the point of view these people abuse them and they should be held accountable. At the same time, for the way out, the victim of abuse needs to look at their part of it if they are putting themselves in harm's way by missing the red flags, by missing the indicators that this person they're attracted to may actually have a proclivity towards domestic violence. All right. Adverse childhood experiences and likelihood of more than 50 sexual partners. Let's not make this judgment. Let's just make this an observation. Could it be that one person turns to alcohol, another person turns to nicotine, and another person turns to sexual activity to try and self-regulate and make themselves feel better? One of the interesting things, I have no science behind this, but I do have observations. It's not unusual for some people in early recovery to become hypersexual. And so they set aside the alcohol, the cocaine, the drugs. And so they're trying to, again, self-regulate, feel better by creating a number of sexual encounters. Kind of interesting. You know, it's interesting. Some of you are thinking about it right now. Okay. And then I think you can see the likelihood of so wanting to belong, so wanting to feel safe, loved, and cared for, that some of our sexual activity may not be very mature. And it could, as a result, involve a lot of unintended pregnancies because we don't take necessary precautions to avoid that. And then as a result of that, more abortions. So then there's a lot of slides regarding that. Here's another domestic violence slide. Problems at work, that goes up. And again, think about the implications this has for those of you who are going to work with people with elevated ACE scores. So in Oregon, we got a problem. We don't have enough people to do all the work. So if someone calls out sick, who's left? Those of you who are already in understaffed facilities. So this can really cause extra stress for those of you who are still working. So it's part of the terrain. It's part of the terrain, and that you'll see this. And it could also then get correlated with greater likelihood of burnout down the road. Well, put a bunch of those things together, you're going to have ACE scores correlated with higher STDs, and then all kinds of issues. Liver disease. Jana eventually got liver cancer that then, no, pancreatic cancer that then went to her liver, and then she had liver cancer, and then that's what took her out. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, that goes up. Ouch. Then all kinds of things. ACEs will increase heart disease, and then a number of things increase. And we take more drugs. We take more antidepressants. By the way, between me and you, it looks like probably one of the best things you can do for antidepressants is exercise. I mean, instead of antidepressants is exercise. Here's something. A lot of people use antidepressants and they stay on the antidepressants, not because they're effective, because they don't know that when they try and go off, they experience withdrawal. So it's actually the avoidance of withdrawal of why they're on continuing antidepressants, not because that it is helping them much, but rather they're avoiding withdrawal. That's kind of interesting. A lot of research out on looking at psilocybin, and with using the proper protocols, that's actually can be very useful for depression. Something you might want to look at. I like a place called the Huberman Lab. This is a PhD out of Stanford, Dr. Huberman, and he'll do a deep dive on a number of topics. One of the topics you might be interested is the use of psilocybin. Okay. Antipsychotic prescriptions, those go up. Again, there's interesting other stuff that folks can do. Uh-oh, I was supposed to remember the name of this book. I believe it's Brain Energy. If you want it, write me and I'll find it for you. I'm pretty sure it's Brain Energy. It's a guy out of Harvard. A very interesting protocol helping people with psychosis and dementia. And that is a keto-based diet. And most people won't stay on that diet. It's very severe. However, his findings are remarkable. So I'm pretty sure it's called Brain Energy, and it talks about that guy out of Harvard. Anti-anxieties, anxiety and depression, kind of the common cold of us in the addiction counseling world. And thank God there are all kinds of ways we now know about. And in the last module here, I will be doing a number of breathing techniques and other strategies on how we can deal with our anxieties. Overall, in my opinion, non-doctor, bad idea for anything but the very short term to use medications to deal with anxiety. Really setting yourself up for some possibilities that aren't good there. Again, not a doctor, so I will show you some other people's work regarding behaviors, especially breathing, exercise, some other trauma release stuff that you might find very interesting. Uh-oh, uh-oh, my least favorite slide. There it is. All right. That little pink clear over there to the right was a percentage of people in their study who had an ACE score of 4 or higher that made it over the age of 65. That's 3%. Jana made it with an ACE score of 7. She made it to the age of 62. Good news. I'm 65. Woo! Okay, fine. Now, I treat that like I'm in extra innings, but I don't have a vision I'm going to die at any moment. I have a vision that I need to be really taking care of myself because I want to be on the planet for a while, and it's later than you think. So all the things I tell you in module 4 are things I take very seriously, that I do and need to do so I can stay on the planet as long as I can. Okay, so what's all this come down to? This is the ACEs pyramid, and it suggests down there at the bottom that adverse childhood experiences result in our brains not developing right, disrupted neurodevelopment. This disrupted neurodevelopment that once it occurs, you can't really undo it. You can learn ways to cope with it, okay, and change our responses to it. But it itself, it's like there's a window of opportunity. For example, here's I think just one of my favorite examples is that children who are raised with English as a primary language have a very low rate of having perfect pitch later on. Children raised with tonal languages like Vietnamese, etc., they have a much higher chance of having perfect pitch. So the environment changes how their brain develops. But then that brain doesn't have to be very old and that window shuts. A 10-year-old, even though they're now being raised in a Vietnamese household, is not going to have their brain develop in such a way that they have perfect pitch. So there are different windows of brain development that can shut. Okay. So eventually you're going to see that we're talking about the reward pathway in the brain. We're talking about the stress apparatus, and those probable set points are pretty hard to change as we get older. That disrupted neurodevelopment causes social, emotional, and cognitive impairment. That results in adoption of health risk behaviors, which then causes disease, disability, and social problems. And then finally, early death. Good news, bad news. The current research says that we can make positive impacts on this disrupted neurodevelopment, that on the impact this has on our life expectancy. maybe 50%. Okay. So some of it is just going to be wear and tear on us that we're not going to be able to do much about. So I'll be talking more and more about that, but you're going to see that we just came to a conclusion of the ACEs study. I think that's awesome. I think I'm going to pause my recording and go take a break. And I'm going to come back. It's going to seem to you like I come back in a nanosecond, but I don't know. You might want to take a break too. Just saying. Hi, guys. Okay, check it out. I went outside. I looked around. I saw my environment, my trees. I saw all this cool stuff out there. Took a breath. And in that moment, I remembered to suggest to you that you should make sure your test is and responses are caught up at this point. So I wouldn't wait. Go back to that document. No, right now, I'm not kidding. No, you're going to forget. So go back, make sure you fill out everything. It'll just go easy for you. I'm telling you, procrastination to me, it's an art form. I get it. But you might want to make sure you do that. It'll be a lot more efficient, a lot easier for you if you do that now. I know you're right. It's because I love you. I'm just kind of suggesting this because I care for you. All right. Okay. Thank God we got through that. Hey, check it out. What I'm going to go back to now is my original PowerPoint. And that is so not it right there. I need to get rid of a PowerPoint or two. And then it will go better when I get back to the PowerPoint I really want to get back to. So, excuse me. So let's see where we're at. Or hopefully have in front of you the right PowerPoint. I don't think we do. So let's try that again. Remember, imperfection is kind of my thing. Kind of what I do. So I'm hoping we have that up in front of you. And you're seeing that we just did the ACEs inventory. And now I'm getting back to that. Uh-oh, this is about to get worse, people. Ooh. Okay. So this is brutal. I'm just going to tell you straight up, this is brutal. This is what it says. This study, you can check on me now, published this week in the American Journal of Preventive Medicine, reports that participants who were exposed to 6 or more different types of ACEs were also 54% more likely to die during the 10-year period of the study. Now, the good news, if people who reported fewer than 6 ACEs did not actually statistically increase risk of death. However, those with 1 to 5 ACEs who did pass away during the study period were on average 3 to 5.4 years younger than those who died in the control group. So generally what people are saying is, and this is all over the Google, if you have an ACE score of 6 or higher, take 20, I know, 20, take 20 years off your life expectancy. Oh my God. So look at the average life expectancy. And I know this is kind of hard, but when they study life expectancy by ethnic groups, people of Asian descent live on average 83.5, Hispanic 77.7, white 76.4, Black 70.8, and Native American Alaska Native 65.2. First of all, that's stunning when you look at those discrepancies between the groups. And look how tragic it becomes if you take 20 years off. Oh my God. I hope that scares you a little bit to get motivated. So I just threw a few things in here so you can look at. If you currently freebase nicotine, on average, you're going to take 10 years off your life. Boy, that's something you immediately could do. But look at the next one. Lack of exercise is actually worse than smoking. So people check it out. If we start working out and stop smoking, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, are we increasing the likelihood of our love bubble beginning to exist longer on the planet? I know our families and our children and our spouses and the whole world, uh, we could mess with it longer. Those two things alone, the biggest two things you probably could do if you want to stay longer on the planet is exercise and stop smoking. You'll see that in the test response thing, I'm asking you to calculate your current life expectancy. It's brutal, and I think it could motivate you to understand when I say it's later than you think, this is why. We already talked about the ACEs pyramid. There it is again for your viewing pleasure. Now we're going to talk about epigenetics. For a lot of people, that's a new thing. It's a new term they're not familiar with. So they are familiar with genetics. So example, my eye color is a result of genetics. You know, you get some DNA from mom, you get some DNA from dad, and it forms part of this blueprint called the DNA, and that's our gene. So there's a lot about us that are kind of hardwired as a result of what we got from our parents. Epigenetics is when the study and the realization that there's an environmental influence on genetic expression. So that gene expression isn't hardwired, that there's a lot of things that develop or don't develop in us as a result of what our childhood environment is. So this is really kind of good news. So before I've taught and we've learned, or we thought, that addiction was primarily a genetic disorder. And so you're kind of screwed if it's a genetic disorder. If it's in your family tree, it's in your family tree. Now we've learned that it's more of an epigenetic disorder. That means if you change the environment in a positive way for your children and their children, you can greatly reduce the likelihood that they will develop addictive behaviors later on. I don't know about you, but I think that's pretty darn good news. Yes, I do. I'm sticking with that story. Okay, so this one's big. Early childhood trauma can alter how the reward pathway, so we have structures in the brain, and the job of those structures is to help keep us alive and to reward behaviors that keep us alive. Okay, so let's just talk about that reward pathway for a minute. Where I live, we have bears. If a bear finds a food source that it likes, dopamine will be release of dopamine will be stimulated in the bear's brain. Now, what that will cause is memory to form. So if I, for example, have an apple tree on my property, which I do, the bears, once they find that apple tree, they'll remember it. Guess where those bears will come the following year? To that same tree. I read one study that said that kind of learning in bears, once they have found a food source, they will come back to that food source for up to 10 years. So even if I get rid of the apple trees or the bird feeders or the other things they come to visit, they're still going to poke around for a long time because dopamine has encoded that memory in their head. And it said, hey, remember this. You know that place, Johnny's place up there in the woods? Go find it. So reward you want, and the reward pathway will tend to help us remember things like where our food is. It makes sex feel good. So people have it and have babies. That helps us keep alive. Connection with people. But if early childhood says people aren't so safe, the reward pathway will really optimize things like Hey, remember your sugar, your salt. Some people will even cut, bite later on in life, addictive drugs, as it will say, hey, you want to feel better, do these things. So early childhood trauma can really alter that reward pathway. This is probably pretty sure where this loss of control phenomena kicks in. Because it turns out this reward pathway is primarily unconscious. On top of that, we put the outer layer of the brain, the prefrontal cortex in particular, and that's where values and motivation, all that stuff tends to live. And or look into the future and all of that. And but addiction, once we stimulate it, it will tell us, I want more sugar. Well, our brain will say, well, but yeah, but I'm prone to diabetes. I probably shouldn't have more sugar. This part of the brain could care less about that message. Right now, if you throw in alcohol or you throw in opiates or whatever for the person with his broken reward pathway, the real issue is that this part will scream for more, as if more alcohol, more marijuana, more cocaine is necessary for survival. Is that true? No. But because of the way the reward pathway developed in that primitive brain, that's the way it's experienced from the inside out. And that part of the brain is more powerful than this part of the brain. So, in a nutshell, it goes like this. If you don't want to stimulate that survival instinct of more, don't prime the pump. So what do? That's why most recovering people need abstinence. Because if you prime the pump, take a little cocaine, take a little alcohol, take a little whatever, that brain will say, oh, thank you, I remember you. And now let's go get some more. I'm going to go to the next one. Early childhood trauma can alter the stress system in such a way that the individual lives in a state of hypervigilance and hyperarousal. This is a programming of the brain. So if the very young child its safety needs are not met, its attunement needs that we talk about later, and that's basically a caregiver interacting with the child in such a way that you're safe. If those aren't met, the child has this much higher reactivity to stimulus. It needs to, and it's continuing to ask the question, am I safe? Am I safe? And then if there's anything that indicates that it's not safe, then that's the hyperarousal. That's the overreaction to sounds, sights, smells, etc. Okay. So these children, for example, will often be viewed as if they have attention deficit disorder. Well, some of them might. Many of them, what they really have, they have a lack of safety disorder. They're just scanning the environment, scanning the environment. Am I safe? Am I safe? Here's a remarkable thing. These kids get older. They never quite feel comfortable. Then they find marijuana. Then they find alcohol. And many people early in their addiction career, they'll go, ah, ah. They finally feel at home. They feel comfortable. They feel comfortable in their own skin because there's a dampening down of that hypervigilance and hyperarousal, right? There's via activating the reward pathway. Okay, I can't connect with people, but these things will give me this false sense of safety. So then the last one, lack of safety in the home environment greatly increases the likelihood the person will develop insecure rather than secure attachment. In a nutshell, with secure attachment, when faced with times of trouble, we turn to people. With insecure attachment, we turn away from people and towards things. So I hope you're adding that all up together and recognizing that this unsafe childhood, this high A score, results in changes in the brain that can be permanent, that greatly increase the likelihood of addiction, and then it creates a huge challenge. In recovery, what most people need is to learn how to trust others and turn to other human beings to feel better, to get support, that human connection is the way out. However, early childhood says you can't trust humans. So this becomes a huge issue for people in early recovery, and those of us who serve them, is to help them through this, developing the ability to create relationships with other people. Okay. So now with this one, I've broken it all down. I'm going to tell you everything I just said, and I've written it down for you. In order for the reward pathway to develop normally, the infant needs a safe environment with attuned caregivers who provide as much physical touch as possible. An attuned caregiver is someone who gives you eye contact, is someone who plays with their children. Okay. It's a give and take. You're going to see what this looks like when I show you the still face experiment. But it's simply, it's not a complicated thing. It's being present with your kids, interacting with your kids, prioritizing your kids. Let me tell you what it's not. It's not being on your cell phone. It's not plopping the kid in front of a television set and not interacting with them. Now, no parent can be 100% on with their kids. I get it, clearly. However, it's one of the real issues of our time that kids are not getting the nurturing and attunement they need from their parents. And then later on, that's causing both attachment problems and certainly addiction problems. Number two, an elevated ACE score provides a rough measure of the amount of safety and healthy touch that was provided the child. The higher the score, the greater the likelihood the pathway, this is a reward pathway, is centered on external self-soothing, eating, sugar, salt, drinking, smoking, etc., and the less likely that human connection activates the pathway. Three, given that the formation of the reward pathway happens very early in life, it appears that the window of opportunity closes and this abnormal pathway becomes fixed. In my career, I haven't yet met that person who clearly, and I don't mean there absolutely are mistakes in diagnosis, but clearly had addictive disease who then learns to be a controlled drinker, for example. The reward pathway is mainly in the unconscious part of the brain and encodes the opportunities of external self-soothing as a survival strategy that is more powerful than all other strategies. That's why abstinence, for those of us who cross the line into addiction with certain behaviors like cocaine use, alcohol use, etc., the abstinence becomes the foundation of recovery. Once a person activates a reward pathway, it creates a craving for more, no matter what it is, alcohol, marijuana, ice cream, etc. And this results in the loss of control experience. So just remember, the reward pathway is quicker and automatic and easily overrides the prefrontal cortex, which causes people with addictive disease to violate their own values because the reward pathway's desire for more is based upon immediate survival needs, which overrides the slow, lumbering process of the prefrontal cortex. So now I'm going to ask you to pause the video, to go to your test, and I'm going to ask you to view a video, then view the Rat Park, fascinating stuff, 42 panel cartoon strip, and then go to the YouTube presentation of Gabor Mate. I love this guy. And he's really going to talk about, from his perspective, everything we've been talking about, and that's the epigenetics of addiction. Okay. And then when you come back, I'm just going to briefly show you the trauma and addiction module. I'm sorry, that's not what I meant. The trauma and addiction graphic that's on your module part 2. So find that. So once you've watched all that stuff, and then have the trauma and addiction graphic in front of you, then restart this presentation. Okay, see you in a bit. Oh, we're still recording. And here I thought I paused it. Well, that was quite a little interesting thing for you. Hope I didn't do anything inappropriate during that because I thought I had paused it. Well, good news. What I was looking for was the trauma and addiction graphic. And I was also previewing my upcoming slides. So, oh well. Hey, I celebrate imperfection. Yes, I do. I do not need to be perfect. But what I do need to do is tell you that I developed this trauma and addiction graphic. And I don't know if you need to remember any of this stuff, and it goes beyond actually the goal of this training. But this is to me kind of at least putting together my current thinking on all these things. And let me work you through this a little bit. I think hopefully you have the trauma and addiction graphic. You're aware that it is in your manual. By the way, I've said in one place it's on page 4, in other places on page 5, but this is what it looks like. So by the way, DTD, this stands for developmental trauma disorder. I just like to say that there. There's an interesting conversation about that. That's a term from Bessel van der Kolk. He is just a huge big dog who knows so much about trauma, and that's a term he tried to get into the DSM-5. Huge story about that. Wow, what a political process that is. But so you'll see that we're saying there is a DNA contribution from the father and from the mother, and then the environment, the epigenetic contribution. So when you add to that a continuum of possibility, on the left-hand side, you have the non-attuned parent. On the right-hand side, you have an attuned parent. So we're basically saying it's the things on the left that are going to greatly increase the likelihood of addiction. And that is high stress, non-attuned parent, insecure attachment. If you want to help with any child in your life, doesn't have to be your own, the more attunement they get, the lower the stress they get, the more secure attachment there is, the less likely the brain will develop in such a way that addiction will become likely. Then we drop down into the development of the reward pathway. For those of you who are interested, there does appear to be some significant differences between the brains and how they operate of folks with the lack of attunement and all of that. So on the left, you have dopamine deficiency. That's a drug in the brain that for the addictive disease, it carries a message, go get me some of this. And that gets overrepresented in the brain. It's too powerful in the brain. It will say, go get me some of this or die. So it's related to craving. It's related to that real focus on the addictive substance. The opioid receptor deficiency. This is why if an alcoholic drinks compared to a non-alcoholic, they drink the same amount. The non-alcoholic may actually feel better with that same amount. They may get more euphoria out of it. So that could partially explain why the more with the person with addictive disease. Serotonin, all these things do a whole lot of things. Serotonin, they think, has to do with satiation. The idea that I've had enough, thank you. My wife, my current wife, she does consume alcohol. In fact, just last night, I went out to dinner, she had a glass of wine. She continued her ritual to have one glass and to leave that much in the bottom of it. What the hell is that? To someone like me, that makes no sense, right? Because I want more if I were to drink. So I don't drink. But her rule is very different. She gets satiated. The more she drinks, the more likely she will not drink. So by the time she gets down to, that little bit being left, she's going, nah, I don't really want it. I'm done. I've had enough. Thank you. That could be a difference in serotonin. And then oxytocin may be related to the actual original problem with the reward pathway. It does appear that oxytocin is needed for all these receptor systems and the reward pathway to develop normally. And then later on, it's related to connection or lack thereof. Kind of interesting if you look at all the hugs that happen at AA and all of that, because that increases oxytocin. All right. And then we drop down into the stress problems. You have people with elevated stress hormone. Cortisol is not a bad thing at all, but when it's chronic and it's too high, then it causes all kinds of problems. We get chronic fight or flight. That's that adrenaline I talked about before. People can't relax. They're just in that state. And then sometimes they dissociate a lot. They're in that chronic freeze state, which isn't a relaxing state by any means. And then, of course, all this combines into this memory formation that says, go get this external stuff. And what do we need to learn in recovery? How to self-soothe in healthy and often internal ways. And as we go down further, it kind of describes, puts a whole thing together, which basically says, we get triggered. Our brain says, what do I need to feel better? For an active addiction, it will point us towards smoking, drinking, consuming drugs, gambling, etc. And then we're off to the races. So I just wanted to put all that together for you. That's my current thinking on it. We are now going to go back to the PowerPoint. And see what kind of marvelous things I have next for you. Oh my God, look at this. I actually have skiing next for you. Now and then, God, we just need to take a break. So I'm a person with a really bad back. I've rehabbed it. I've rehabbed my addiction. And sometimes you just need to let it rip. This is part of my own little heaven. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Life is good. That's right. Let's rock it. All right. Wasn't that fun? Now it's going to get a little heavy. So I am going to go to invite you to go to a YouTube. I'm actually going to take you there because I'm going to have a little bit better quality. So it turns out that this was a very, very popular YouTube that they just found interesting. I find it very instructive. It's a YouTube in which a mother sings and a baby cries. And that I hope you're not seeing these commercials that are coming up. There you go. It's gonna skip them. Okay.
Mommy's gonna sing you a song.
All right. So let me get this up again. Try that, get it right. There we go. So what I have in the PowerPoint, if you want to take yourself to this YouTube, then you could. But for now, we're going to show it to you. And I basically want you to get just how sensitive children are.
You want mommy to sing a song, honey? Let me know how you feel about the song, okay? I don't want you to come out here no more. I beg you for mercy. You don't know how strong my weakness is, or how much it hurts me. 'Cause when you say it's over, I want to believe it's true. So I let you hear tomorrow. I'm gonna wake up missing you. Wake up missing you. When the one you love's in love with someone else. Don't you know it's torture? I mean, it's a living hell. No matter how I try to convince myself, this time I won't lose control. So I let you hear tomorrow. I'm gonna wake up missing you. Wake up missing you. Oh, you feel the pain in the song, even big tears. You crying? Oh, you crying, monkey. Okay, mommy's done. Okay. The song.
Okay, in the event that that didn't go well, and you couldn't hear it well or whatever. So please, I have the URL for you in the slide, and or you can just Google. It's mother singing, baby crying. Now, why do I show that? Just to show how sensitive babies are. Now, that seems like a silly thing to have to do. However, it hasn't been that many years that pediatricians, maybe 10 plus, but not that many, that pediatricians have decided it's a good idea to give little boy babies anesthesia before they cut part of their penises off. Think about that for a minute. Like, oh my God. What? Oh yeah, they don't remember was kind of the thinking. Won't be any big deal. It turns out that they can measure such things. It is a big deal, and pain sensitivity really goes up in those babies that can be measured. One study I saw for months after that kind of surgery. Well, if the brain is developing during that time, what's that implication? That's kind of scary. The other thing is, again, in my lifetime, physicians told parents to don't spoil their children. Let them cry themselves to sleep. You can hold your children too much and all of that. Today, we know that's just not true. Now I get that you can't hold a kid all the time, but if you're not holding the kid because you need to sleep or whatever, that's fine. But you're doing that for you, not the kid. Let's be clear that that child needs as much touch and attunement as you can give it. If you don't give kid enough touch and attunement, it's going to absolutely interfere with its normal development. Okay, that's the way it is, and that's painful, I know, but it's just the reality that that we understand things differently, and so if you want to um, maximize your child's brain development or their children in your life, then you would want to give them as much attention and as much attunement as possible.
Babies.
Okay. Now I'm going to show you one that's, again, you can see the URL when I get back to the PowerPoint, but it's called the still face experiment. Now there's many of these on there. This is kind of like the original one. This is attunement. So I keep saying attunement. You're going to see the mother giving excellent attunement with the child. Then you're going to see the mother turn away and stop giving any attunement to the child. And then she's going to come back and give what's called the still face. I want you to really notice how much that still face negatively impacts the child. Okay, so now we're going to go to the still face experiment. You should be seeing that guy in front of you. Okay, here we go.
This young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In this still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby, who's about a year of age.
I need my girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions. They turn away. They feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation.
All right. So I'm going to need to stop that PowerPoint. Okay, there we go. So the good, the bad, and the ugly. Oh, this gets worse for a little bit. By the way, I'm on my bouncy chair. I have to readjust on occasion. The good, the bad, the ugly. So good, there's good news. Anyone can do that. That's playing with your children. Did you see how quickly the baby came back around when mama was going to play with the child again? And it's simple stuff, interaction stuff, natural stuff. Okay. Bad. I wish we could name it something else, really, because it's not bad. Bad simply means something's going on with the child. It's hungry. it's scared, it's something happened, it's wet, needs a diaper change. Something's not going that great for the child in that moment. And that's when we notice and we go, okay, what does this child need? And so we figure that out. We meet the needs of the child, returns, right? That's called good parenting. Cool. So good is not possible 100% of the time. So attunement, excellent. Something happens. He's going to call that bad. And then we meet those needs, and then the child can get back to a baseline of good. Okay. Ugly is a problem. Ugly is the last lack of attunement. Think about the ACE score. Those things that are triggering us to say yes to the ACE score are things that are going to fall in the ugly category. When either the child is neglected, no one's paying attention to the child, no one's interacting with the child. Think, for example, of a parent who is hungover. Do they really want to be dealing with an infant? Do they really want to be dealing with a child? And what's communicated in their face? The kid gets that. The kid picks that up instead of getting attunement. And then if the parent's intoxicated, what's that do for the kid? Or the parent is really stressed out. And believe me, as we're trying to show with the mother singing, baby crying, the baby doesn't care why the parent is stressed out, but just that they are. And that the child can feel that. Is lack of attunement that comes from that. So we live in this age. So first, COVID has given this weird social experiment that a lot of babies were raised by people who had masks on their face. What I said was a lot of children were raised by people who had masks on their face, which interferes with the attunement process. A lot of babies are being raised in environments of food scarcity, housing problems. Oh my God, could you imagine what it's like for the children in Israel or Gaza right now? Their parents are afraid, right? And they should be. Their parents are afraid. And that therefore those little brains are getting programmed uh, in that ugly perspective. Takes a lot of parent to be able to set that stuff aside and be present with their children. So this then leads us back to the PowerPoint. And that's what we've been talking about. Good, bad, and ugly. And for you, there's responses that I'm asking you to consider. You might even turn off the video for a bit. What effect does childhood trauma have on a healthy attunement process? I know for those of you who have addictive disease, who have children, you're going right now, oh, what effect did my addiction have on my children? It's a normal and natural thing to do. You can't undo it. The best thing we can do now is offer our own recovery and our own attunement now. You can't undo that stuff. For those of you who have older children, but you still have access to them, you already know it takes a lot of patience with those kids. They ain't going to trust you for quite a while. That you're going to be present, nurturing, be able to give them that good attunement. That's going to take a while. And I just want to introduce a concept that cell phones are really interfering with brain development of children. Hey, if you have someone taking care of your kid, I strongly recommend you make sure that person is not on the phone all day, that they're not on their tablets or computer all day. That little brain is exploding with development. That little brain is born with about 200 billion neurons. By the end of a year, the first year of life, they're down to about 100 billion. And why? Because those 100 billion have networked and they're figuring out how to work together, and certain things are pruned out as these connections are made. I mean, millions of connections are being made in just seconds. Seconds. Minutes. Oh my God, the brain is so different. And you all know this if you've been around babies, that the baby can change daily in very visible ways when they're quite young. Well, if we're not paying attention to them, if we're not giving the attunement they need, that brain's going to end up different than it could have. And I'm very concerned that the caregiver's reliance on cell phones or attachment to technology and all of that is interfering with the child's ability for themselves to develop healthy attachment and a healthy brain. Speaking of attachment, please don't overthink attachment. Look at it this way. Secure attachment means the child feels safe and it can trust its parents, caregivers, and its needs are getting met. They count on it. Secure attachment is when a person has it, it's characterized by being comfortable with closeness and intimacy and able to communicate their needs and feelings in relationships, as opposed to someone who then instead develops insecure attachment. It's characterized by a lack of trust and a lack of secure base. People with an insecure attachment style may behave in anxious, ambivalent, or unpredictable ways. So I know there are other types of insecure attachment. And so you certainly could delve into that. You'll find there's different names and you can do different inventories if you're interested to find out, do you have a particular type of insecure attachment? I get that. For me, it's most useful simply to put it into one or the other. And do I trust people? In times of trouble, do I turn towards people or do I not trust people? And rather, in times of trouble, I turn away from people. So, based on attachment theory, substance abuse can be understood as self-medication, as an attempt to compensate for lacking attachment strategies. So again, tie all that together with the reward pathway stuff we talked about, the stress apparatus issues we talked about. The brain's different. We now have insecure attachment. We don't do well with self-soothing. So we use these addictive behaviors. Well, these behaviors, which then become addictive, is attempts to deal with our pain, to self-medicate ourselves. I did find a study that said in this study, in clinical samples, that found that 86% of people had insecure attachment, whereas in the normal population, 42%, which is pretty high, of people have insecure attachment. Okay, so I wrote it all out. This is my little graphic I put together. So let's first go when things go right. You have attunement. You have your safety needs met. Okay. We develop secure attachment. Our reward pathway is normal. Our stress system is normal. When faced with life challenges, we learn to turn to others and we learn to self-regulate. Okay. Yay. But if attunement and safety needs are not met, we develop insecure attachment. Our reward pathway is cued to things, not people. Our stress system is abnormal. We have hypervigilance and sometimes hypoarousal. That's more of that dissociation. We're highly reactive and we amplify life's challenges. We overreact, we trigger it a lot. We turn to self-medication because we don't know how to self-regulate. And all that ends up with addictive disease. Okay, that's me. That's tying it all together. And we already did that trauma and addiction graphic. So putting it all together now, my God, have you hung in there this long? Yay, you. Okay. So lack of safety negatively impacts neurodevelopment, it's a brain, resulting in detrimental impacts on health throughout one's lifetime. This includes alteration of the brain's reward pathway, which set the stage for the loss of control experience. It also involves alteration of the stress system, which becomes highly sensitive and results in a person becoming hypervigilant and experiencing hyperarousal. Insecure attachment resulting in interference with connecting with others is the norm in this group. When stressed or in pain, this results in a turn towards things in an attempt to self-regulate and away from people instead of towards them. Oh my God. We are at the end of module 2. Yep. Hey, when we come back, we're then going to kind of broaden it out and into looking at family systems, looking at how this trauma then plays out in our behavior. We're going to be looking at some family roles. You're going to be seeing a movie that that I really love. It's quite old, but that I really love because it really portrays these dynamics. And then we're going to begin to explore boundaries and then some things coming out. So that's really the next segment, is going to broaden this stuff out from the person into the family. Trauma and addiction. Part 3 coming up soon to a place near you. All right. Thank you, guys.